Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. This story about what if Naruto was king of the hell. Let's start.
Minato stood tall and proud as he stared at the item presented before him for a moment. To him, the moment felt like it was long and drawn out. To those watching, it was noticed at all. The next moment saw him reach out and grip the item solidly in his hands before holding it up as if inspecting it. A crown, silver in color and simplistic in design by his request. A thin ring with raised points every few inches. He turned from the man he had taken the crown from and held it out toward the gathered mass of nobles from across the underworld. They all bowed readily as he settled crown onto his own brow. Among them all were those that he had known during the war. Friends, comrades, even some former enemies. All kneeling before him respect fu. That of course excluded the man who had handed him the crown. As well as his new wife who stood to his right, and lastly his four closest friends and confidants just Bahi. All the rest bowed down though. It was terrifying to see so many willingly place themselves at his whim. Among them two stuck out without trying. They shared his coloration, and his blood. His aunt and uncle. The newly appointed Lord and Lady Phoenix. They bowed even low. Then the others, their foreheads nearly pressing against the floor. How strange to be here. The complete opposite of where I was. He thought as he stared at them. Memories of his childhood threatened to invade his mind, but he fought them off to give the small speech he had planned along with the man that had made all of this pos. For him, still the thoughts of a time not so long ago for most devils ran through the back of his mind as he continued to reel with his newfound position of ruler. He still had yet to grasp the magnitude of his role after all. That of the singular and undisputed, King of Hell. Nearly 2 decades ago and things were quite different. Minato was the one that knelt. He bowed and scraped despite the humiliation and abject pain he felt. His own pair towered over him with faint sneers of disgust marring their inhumanly perfect faces. A look reserved for the lowest dregs of their society, and now for their failure of a son. Not even a hint of regeneration. You lack my gifts, boy. Monsgrad Phoenix, head of the clan, spat as he glared down at him. Bad enough you control the flame and wind spells so poorly that you burn yourself, but this, the rumors that will start. His mother Yalara Phoenix shook her head, worry. For the remarks and veiled taunts her fellow noble ladies would have than the blistered and burned hand that Minato cradled under his form as he bowed. You cannot remain the heir without the bloodline. Monsgard growled while turning away from Minato in thought. Worthless. Truly worthless. Why couldn't you have been stillborn? Less rumors that way. Less bad publicity with the other houses. The man continued to complain with seeming to nod along. Minato remained silent. He was a bright boy and despite what his parents were saying now, he was far more advanced than most of his fellow heirs. Unfortunately, his fellow heirs had their family powers and support to fall back on. Minato had neither. He had grown to not expect it either. He didn't expect their hatred though. If we kill him now, we can at least try for another heir of some capability. His mother suggested, gently taking her husband's hand in her own. Staring at the floor with wide eyes, Minato waited to see if the blow would come. He had seen his father extinguish the life of servants before with a flick of the wrist and a flame so hot that it left permanent marks on any surface it touched. At the least it would be fast if he was killed like that. A near instantaneous disintegration. Brother, that's terrible. Another voice called, causing Minato to dare twisting his head just enough to see who spoke. His uncle Ograth Phoenix was kind to him, though distant. Still Minato felt nothing but thanks for the man as he and his wife stepped forward to his defense. Or at least spare his life. You claim little Minato as a failure, brother, but he might fail in our family abilities. He is the best in other ways and you know it. Don't let that anger blind the both of you. Ograth argued with his wife Hidana nodding in agreement from beside him. You speak out for him, little brother. Monsgard asked with an edge to his voice. Minato didn't flinch at that. This was the typical manner of the underworld these days after all. He'd heard some of the peasants say that the Great War had broken the and minds of too many, that it had corrupted them all and made them cruel and merciless. He couldn't attest to that. The Great War had ended, or rather been on pause for the last century. If only because none of the factions involved could continue without risky their extermination at the hands of the others. For Minato, Life in the underworld simply meant one was expected to be ruthless and cruel, even to family. Perhaps especially to family. It made you stronger according to. No one else was alive to argue. Monsgard, his demonic energy is more potent than most adults in the clan and he grasps most spells with ease. He only burned himself because the spell he was trying to impress you with was so large. He may not be right as heir, but surely he will make fine breeding stock for our clan's girls. Ograth suggested. Monsgard and Yalera shared a thoughtful look before Monsgard nodded to his brother. Minato would have blown a sigh of relief if he wasn't certain he would catch at least beating if his father recalled his presence. Without the regeneration or mastery over flame and wind, he's next to useless with our name. Still, it would be a wasted investment of the last few years if we simply got him. Get up, boy, Monsgard said as he turned to face Minato again. The child climbed to his feet shakily, getting an annoyed huff from his mother at the show of pain and difficulty as he did so. She stepped forward and tightly gripped his ha. Minato did his best to bite back the hiss of pain, but the tears welling in his eyes were clear enough to all in the room. Yalera healed the burn to an extent. Not completely. Wasn't about to waste that much energy on him, he knew that. The fact that he was receiving any healing from her at all surprised him a bit, and he could only imagine was some sort of deep-rooted maternal instinct that didn't extend beyond the most basic of aid. Or perhaps it was simply a whim or worry that people would say she was an abusive mother. Beyond the conversation today, neither of his parents had ever struck him or of harming him at all. Even if they so coldly conversed about executing him now. You will serve well as a servant. You would have even made a fine heir if you'd been born with our abilities. She said, almost sadly, looking down at him as she spoke. Whatever odd feelings seemed to be hidden behind the stoic expression on her face faded away quickly, and she snapped once to summon a servant. A distant cousin of the. Based upon looks. One born to a middle-class parent or something. Move him into a servant room on the far wing of the estate. Put him to work out of sight for a few months while we look into options. She commanded the maid, who bowed before taking Minato by the hand and leading him away. At least the maid's grip was more gentle and he no longer had blisters on his skin to be painfully popped. Minato began to eventually wonder if perhaps his mother and father had forgotten his existence completely by the time his 6th birthday arrived. He spent it alone in his quarters. A small singular room with a bed, a table, and a small kitchenette. Servants were not allowed to use the main kitchens for themselves after all. The room had been dingy and covered in cobwebs and dust when he'd moved into it, but it was a bit cozy now. More than enough for him anyway. It had room enough to a few smaller spells, and thanks to the massive force of servants actually working for the Phoenix family, Minato actually spent the vast amount of his time simply here in H. room. That was a blessing. Since coming to be on his own, far from the finer portions of the palace, Minato had started to love not having to try and impress anyone or fear failing to do so. None of H. fellow servants tried to invade his life or even judged him for lacking the abilities of his parents. It was almost nice. It was also unbearable. His work hours were few and far apart normally, but they were also degrading. He scrubbed and cleaned things that he knew could far more easily be cleaned by magic. It was the style that living servants be made to do it instead. A sign of power and prominence in their society. He hated inefficient things like that with every bit of his being. He hated the idea of someone treating him like nothing and getting away with it even more, though. The idea that he might fade into obscurity here haunted him. It was a possibility and no one would judge him. Fade away. Find a wife. Have children. Be normal and average in their society. Be nothing. He couldn't actually do that, of course. Instead, Minato spent every moment he could poring over tomes he slipped out of the vast libraries and collections of his mother and father. With that, he experimented with his demonic power as well, not like the majority of devils like to do. Most other children of clans had their family ability and the usual magical abilities all devils had. Minato could only use the latter and had no special talent for controlling it. Compared to others, any progress he made there would be through his own hard work and time spent training. Something he was particularly fine with. No one would ever be able to say that he wasn't devoted and driven. He would at least accomplish that much. His uncle had mentioned that his reserves of demonic power were vast even among the adults of their family. That much was true, but the reserves of devil's power were the deciding factor in the true measure of power of that devil. What good was infinite power if it was inaccessible? So that was where Minato started. Control. Absolute control to the smallest possible extent of his power. A year after being made little more than a servant of his family, and Minato had moved on to the second stage of his self-appointed training. He could control his power, BU. Needed to make the smaller controlled amounts more potent, so he began playing with his power. He narrowly avoided punishments after blasting apart a couple of tables as he worked on it. He hadn't avoided a caning from the head maid sadly. Not when he accident. A metal platter through the wall about a millimeter from the end of her nose one day. At least his fellow servants had been kind enough to cheer him up after the fact, encouraging him to aim a bit better in the future. He took their words to heart, just not in the way they likely expected him to. Finally, a year and a half after being sentenced to anonymity by his former parents, he made a breakthrough. It didn't look like much. Simply a condensed ball of pure energy. Most devils would scoff at the sight of it. They could hurl pure demonic power easily after all. Just like he could. This was different though. A tiny amount of power forced in on itself over and over until it began to implode in a brilliant flash of light and heat. A slight alteration to the basic offensive technique taught to young devils. Most children were taught to incorporate demonic power into their fighting with everything. A little energy added to a punch or slash of a sword or some added oomph in a. But again, this was different to all of that. It wasn't really a spell or an enhancement to another attack. It was a feedback loop. Energy collapsing into a micro-explosion. More energy into subsequent explosions. Not that it was infinite. If he stopped feeding it minuscule amounts of his demonic power, the technique would rapidly burn itself out. However, if he launched it before its detonation was easily several dozen magnitudes more than the basic use of demonic energy. And that was the tip of the proverbial iceberg. He could add his compacted demonic power to any attack just like the normal version. A punch, a kick, a ball of fire. Minato. Make them all far more devastating than they appeared. It was just the start he promised himself. He didn't feel ready to show this to others yet. He needed more. He was still a devil despite everything. He wanted more and key. His cards close to his chest until the right moment would be how he could snatch up whatever that more he wanted was. He never would have guessed the opportunity to begin truly reaching for something better would come so soon. Nor that it would come disguised as a terrifying return to tea of his parents for a night. He hadn't missed the horrible social events of society during his time spent as a servant to his clan. Forced into a fine set of clothes that his mother had made for him and dragged along to attend, Minato stood with his parents in a massive ballroom crowded with hundreds of other devils. For some reason, Lord Zekram Bale had made the request of his fellow nobles to all attend a ball and feast at one of his estates, but the caveat was that they could only they brought their legal heirs to the function. Despite his status as a servant being somewhat known, Minato was, legally speaking, still the heir to the Phoenix clan. At least until his mother eventually fell pregnant once more and his parents could try for their perfect heir. He just hoped he could have some impact on him or her when they did arrive, so that maybe they wouldn't be quite as awful to be around as his mother and father usually. Even now the both of them had made it clear that they expected him to be with the Bale clan servants and making him useful in some way. Minato was actually almost thankful that they were sending him off to work with the servants rather than fraternizing with the other clan heirs. He wasn't comfortable in fine clothes anymore. Not to mention his etiquette had slipped slightly in the last year and a half. He just couldn't properly fit as a noble anymore if one were to ask him. He still felt more comfortable with other servants, and so just as his mother and father desired, his way over to help the maids and butlers. It took an annoying amount of time to find the place where the other servants were gathered, filling drinks and cleaning glasses. A well-oiled machine of lower and middle C devils easily churned out the party favors and drinks that hundreds of high-class devils consumed in quick succession. Most of them were much older than Minato himself was. In fact, more of them were closer the age of Lord Bale than Minato himself if the young boy had to guess. That first thing that made both himself and one other stand out among the group. Unlike him, however, she seemed to almost be running the program. He eyed her a bit suspiciously first before approaching. Many among the pillar clans are the elite clans that were directly related to the four Satan families liked to give the servants a hard time whenever they became bored. He'd seen it at home, though thankfully despite their cold and callous demeanor, neither of his parents had much pity interrupting the work of the servants. Maybe that was where Minato got his own love for efficiency. The girl was most definitely not harassing the servants though. Even though she clearly wasn't one herself, she only seemed to be helping them. Dressed in a fine dress with her long silver hair made up in a beautiful and elegant bun, the girl coordinated the servants like a woman twice her age could only dream to. Workers indulged her too, though he wasn't sure if it was because she was clearly highborn or because she was an actually effective coordinator. Once he was certain she wasn't trying to toy with the servants here, he stepped forward to introduce himself to her. After all, another highborn that was more comfortable. The staff than the party goers sounded like the exact kind of person Minato could see himself getting along with. Hello, why are you here instead of at the party? He asked genially with a smile. The girl barely looked his way before gracefully reaching up to snatch a flute of some drink off of a tray and holding it out toward him. This one is quite popular right now, my lord. It has a slight fruit flavor that most consider like sweet berries. However, I find it closer to melon myself. She said, all but telling him to please go away. Minato blinked as he reflexively took the glass from her before his mind caught up to his actions. He stared down at the glass before looking back up at her. She had still look his way. Sorry, I wasn't looking for a drink. He said awkwardly. Perhaps something to eat then. I assure you that we can accommodate you, please return to the ballroom though. I will not be allowing anyone to toy with the staff tonight, she said before finally turning to look at him with scarlet eyes that fit perfectly with her silver hair and pale skin. Toy with the no. I mean, I would never. I'm actually supposed to help them, he said with a blush on his face. Help them? She asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes, he said before clearing his throat. Let me introduce myself. Minato Phoenix, servant and temporary heir of the Phoenix clan. He set the glass down and offered his hand before blushing again and shifting to grasping the girl's hand and kissing the knuckle instead. I see, she answered with widened eyes. Temporary heir. My parents have decided the best place for me to serve my clan is in a literal servile role. However, by birth I remain heir until they produce a younger sibling for myself. Said with a fragile smile. She nodded at him while seeming to scan his face and general appearance much more closely now than before. I've never heard of a clan doing such a thing. The laugh Minato gave to that comment sounded grating to both of them. He didn't quite have the social control of himself to hide the hurt regarding his status within his perfectly. In fact, he largely expected that he never would, even if he got over the pain of being thrown aside eventually. Still, he was quick-witted enough to try and direct the conversation to a more appealing direction. I've decided to try and be a pioneer, he said with a weak grin. Though it strengthened when the girl giggled indulgently. It may have been a pity laugh, but it did make H. better about his situation a marginal amount. You know why I was sent to help the staff. Why are you doing it? He asked her. She hummed before shrugging her shoulders. I can do as I please within reason. It pleases me to help them with this event. I haven't heard of one this big since the ball for the end of the Great War. They need all the help that they can get. Minato felt a genuine smile begin to build on his lips at her admission, only to lean forward a bit as she seemed to want to say something a bit quieter to him. I also don't really enjoy spending time with the other elite clan heirs. They like abusing the lower class devils too much. It's disturbing. Oh, I wouldn't either. You really seem like a decent person though. Better than most I've met among the high class anyway. The girl simply scoffed and told him not to look into it so much, though she had a very pleased look in her eye and faint blush to match his own as she did. You want to help, so you can help me fill these glasses here. She took charge. Of course, though, can you tell me your name first? Minato asked. He had to stifle a laugh as the girl stammered and blushed at her own breach in social protocol. Graphia Lucifuge. My apologies for being so rude. She answered almost robotically. No need to apologize, Graphia. Let's get to work. The party went on for hours and Minato and Graphia worked diligently alongside the Bale clan servants for hours as well. Most of the staff had initially been a bit awkward working alongside them, but by this point in the night they had come to regard the two children as wonderful helping hands. Even if their attire made them struggle a little. Grafia more than Minato, since her dress repeatedly got in the way of anything she was trying to do. As the hours rolled past, though, they began to grow tired, and Minato had started to lose focus ever so slightly as he moved about collecting empty glasses and refilling Drin. Lack of focus of course led to the worst possible scenario as he bumped into someone with a full flute of champagne in hand, bathing whoever it was with the drink. His stomach felt as if it had filled with lead at the thought of embarrassing a noble like that. Thoughts of his father quite literally killing him came rushing to the forefront. Mind as he stared at the man before him. As his mind caught up to the moment and he processed who exactly it was he was standing before, the lead in his stomach doubled in weight and his heart felt as though become encased in ice. The man was older, a rarity almost to the point of non-existence in Devil Society. Minato easily knew who the old warrior was. Zekram Bale, the most powerful of the Pillar Clan heads and host of the party. The one Pillar Clan member with as much respect from the current Mao as the elite clans. A legend. And Minato had just stained the man's shirt. You're not dressed like one of my servants. What's your name, boy? Bale asked with little room for defiance in his tone. Minato Phoenix, Lord Bale. Minato replied before bowing his head lowly in respect. Enough of that bowing, stand up straight and let me look at you. Zekram commanded, causing Minato to snap up properly once again. The young heir of the Phoenix clan? Bale asked. Yes, sir. Minato replied, feeling it was best not to add any modifiers about it being temporary to that. If the man realized who he was so easily, then he really didn't think necessary to explain the rest. Zekram likely knew more about him than he was comfortable with anyway. The older man had a different idea though. Why is the heir of the Phoenix clan serving out drinks at my party? Are my staff not doing the job I gave to them well enough? No, or I mean they are. I'm a placeholder for an heir, nothing more without my clan's bloodline. Minato hurriedly responded to make sure the nice staff he had worked night didn't get into some kind of trouble because of him. That doesn't explain why you are doing the job of a servant. Zekram said bluntly. With all due respect, Lord Bale. We both know that it does. Minato said simply. Bale smiled then. A real smile with no hidden malice like most devils had when they smirked at one another. Cheeky little boy, I look forward to seeing you again sometime. With that, Zekram Bale wandered off back into the party, completely uncaring for the stain on his shirt. Who would say anything about it to him among the Pillar families in? Minato watched him walk off with a bit of desire though. The man was known to every devil in the underworld. Known for his old skills in the early days of the Great War. As for his strategies later on and his leadership afterward in maintaining his lands. He wanted so badly to be like him. Hopefully they would indeed meet again soon. Minato had thought that returning to his normal life as a servant to his clan after the Bale party would be a good thing. Perhaps that he would at least enjoy getting out of stuffy clothing and away from the curious eyes of other nobles from across the underworld. Instead he had been disappointed. A tiny traitorous little part of his heart actually wished his parents would change their minds upon their return home. Maybe restore him old room and status. He did all he could to snuff that little ember of hope and desire down. It felt as if he spent all day silently telling himself to recall his place in this world. He was a servant. He would always be a servant. His mother and father had decided Yupo. And his lack of gifts had enforced it. For some reason he couldn't snuff his desires out though. Even as he made use of himself as a servant as he was commanded, he continued to work tirelessly in practicing his magic. A minute little example of rebellion against the fate that had been dictated to him. That meant he returned to his private studies of magic and demonic power. He devoured all he could and practiced in every moment that he was free. Of course that had couple of hidings from his superiors among the servants when he'd accidentally caused a mess or broken something. Learning that condensing his demonic power down to practically the level of atoms and directing it at something was an excellent way to destroy something outright. As nearly commit suicide. Punishments for suddenly blowing apart a tree or a door were swift and brutal, and Minato had to take small reprieves from his secret training when he'd done so, as he needed to rest his body from the damage done both by himself and his superiors. Luckily, the servants seemed to believe any infraction he committed would lead to punishments upon the entire staff. He couldn't deny the possibility. His father and Moth, to make examples whenever they were trying to get a point across. Forcing everyone to be responsible for the actions of one individual helped keep them all in line as they enforced the rules upon each other. He had to admit it was an effective system even if he felt it unjust. After all, the thought of his actions leading to punishments for some of the kind maids and servants that, for him, all this time sickened him. Despite all this, he couldn't bring himself to stop in his experimentation. Sadly, there was only so much he could do while both limited in his position within his clan and his need for secrecy. He was certain his mother and father would not approve their cast-off child developing any sort of real power. Too much of a risk to the future unmade heir of the vaunted Phoenix family. So here he was, once more frustrated by the concept that perhaps he was limited to only what was already made. His compression technique was something he'd never others using, but while it could have interesting effects on spells when used together, he couldn't help but feel he was limited or forgetting something. It definitely did not help matters that he was more or less restricted from experimenting with combinations of anything but the most basic of magical spells. Frustration filled him as he looked around to make sure no one was around before summoning up his demonic power and compressing a tiny amount down as tightly as he and converting it into a water spell. The little jet of water came out like an incredibly powerful pressure washer. He hoped that it would clean off the spot he'd been scrubbing at for over half an hour. It did, however. It left in its place a hole the size of a coin that not only burrowed deep into the stone of the wall, but all the way through to the point that he could see outside onto the grounds beyond. Rapidly looking left and right, he stood and fled from the area at a brisk walk, doing his absolute best to look as though he had done nothing wrong. That sort of thing would him all manner of punishments from his fellow servants, and as terrible as it was, he hoped that perhaps it would simply be missed long enough for the others to forget he been working to remove a spot on the wall there. As he fled, though, he managed to plant himself into a much worse situation than essentially cleaning a literal hole in the wall. Turning a corner, he collided face first with his mother, sending both himself and the woman sprawling onto the floor. Or at least he would have had she not been caught by his father and righted. Staring up in mild horror, Minato couldn't look away from the heated glares of the two of them. At least not until he noticed there was in fact a third person with them. A man that stuck out among their clan quite easily. His coloring was far from the ubiquitous blonde hair and blue eyes of the Phoenix. "Forgive my servant, Lord Bale. I assure you it will be punished appropriately," Monsgard said while turning his cold blue eyes on to his former son. Correct me if I am wrong, but isn't that your son? He is your heir, yes? Bale asked as he stared down at Minato with a blank and carefully masked expression. Unfortunately so, Monsgard replied with clear distaste and shame. He looked as though he had licked the most sour lemon in the world as he admitted to it as well. Unfortunately, is that why he is dressed as a servant? He's some kind of undesirable for you, Monsgard? Zekrom asked. The Phoenix head frowned even deeper. Admitting the issues around his current heir was not something that was easy for one as prideful as Monsgard Phoenix. Especially, like Zekrom Bale, who was held up as the highest among the Pillar family clans. The only one among their number treated with the respect that the Formao gave to the clans and their own descendants. Minato was born deficient. He knows his place but is still adjusting to it clearly. Monsgard said while shooting a look down at his son. Get up off of the ground already, child. Yalara scolded her son. Minato scrambled to his feet and assumed a respectful and rigid posture as he stood aside against the wall of the hallway while still trying to disappear as much as possible. Course that wasn't going to work, but deep inside it was suddenly all he could wish for. Deficient. He didn't inherit the gifts of your clan. What a shame. It does happen sometimes though. At least he seems to take his role seriously. That should be praised. Him that I recall seeing at my party recently helping my staff with their tasks, after all. Zekrom said before reaching out toward Minato and laying a hand on his head. Minato fought back the flinch from the man's movement, but once his hand made contact with the top of his head, Minato felt the tiniest wave of demonic pressure swirl over around him. His hair stood on end for an instant and then the feeling was gone. Just as Zekrom withdrew his hand. He did not, however, withdraw his gaze. Unreadable violet eyes stared down at Minato, similar to how one might appraise a valuable object. It sent a shiver down his spine. Monsgard, what do you plan for him in the long run? Zekram asked the other lord, causing both Phoenix nobles to pause a moment as they processed the man's words. Thoughtful looks ran between the pair before Monsgard cleared his throat. Well, while I have placed Minato here under the supervision of our staff to learn to be properly humble, it has become my intention to retain Minato as a member of my main household. He will one day advise, protect, and support my future heir. Barring that, he will remain as my heir himself until a more fitting candidate is made apparent. Monsgard said, and Minato swore he almost caught a roll of Zekram's eyes from his father's words. I see, so then he is quite valuable to you in the future of your clan? Zekram asked. Yes, after all, should our heir be a girl, Minato's expansive reserves of demonic power would prove to be a perfect match for her. Their children would be more likely to both the gifts of our family and such large reserves. Yalera replied. Minato frowned as his parents both spoke of his importance to the clan and family. Plans for his future, a possible marriage to a younger sister that was not even conceived yet, and sudden respect for his one apparent genetic gift. It was all a far cry from the near execution they planned on giving him at a whim. So you could sense the massive reserves the boy will have one day. I would call you a fool if you hadn't. I've only seen reserves of that size in children his age among the families themselves. It truly is a tragedy that he lacks your family gifts. Such power would have catapulted your family up the social ladder effortlessly. He's already like a stallion with what he possesses now, Zekram said as he turned away from Minato fully to face his parents. We are quite proud of him despite the disappointments that his birth also presented. Yalera easily lied. I'm sure. Now let us cut to the chase. I have plans this evening. I want your son as my private servant. I'm willing to pay for it and to sign a contract aligning our clans CL together, Zekram said without emotion, catching all of them off guard. You want to buy me? Minato asked with some horror bleeding into his voice. Of course I do. With proper training you will make an excellent tool and assistant. Perhaps even the head of my household staff. It would be quite the benefit for your fam. All honesty. Zekram responded as he raised an eyebrow and clearly made his impatience known toward Monsgard and Yalera. Minato fought back tears as his parents clearly looked interested at the prospect. After they had planned to kill him before, he had thought such a thing wouldn't hurt, but somehow he was wrong. Being treated like little more than property to be sold off made him sick to his stomach, but Amelie's. If that was the case, he could easily experience the legendary power of destruction firsthand. Not something he was willing to learn about. At least not in that fashion. As his mind wandered and he pondered the exact plans and reasoning of his new owner, Minato quickly lost track of time. The minutes became an hour, and almost on the sharp knock yanked the boy from his thoughts and over toward the door to his room. Unsure as to what to say, simply saying, "Who is it?" felt foolish. Minato stood in place and stared at the door in trepidation. Thankfully he didn't stare long as the door swung open and Zekram himself stalked in with a swagger and confidence only those of immense power both personally and could hope to possess. You didn't respond when I knocked, boy. From this point on you will call out if I come to your room like that. Understood? He asked, not even bothering with a greeting. Yes, Lord Bale, Minato quietly said. The man stared down at Minato for a moment before scoffing. He seemed displeased with something, though Minato couldn't say what it was. It did worry him a bit though. Buyer's remorse in this situation would lead directly to his very untimely demise. Follow me, we have things to do and matters to discuss. Zekram commanded before pivoting and striding from the room. Minato had to jog to catch up to him. They walked in silence for some time. Minato was more or less fine with that. He was unbothered by silence for the most part, which surprisingly seemed to please the old. It was a bit hard to tell, but already he was starting to get a feeling for the personality of his new master. Zekram Bale was a powerful man that knew precisely what he wanted and precisely how to get what he wanted. Furthermore, he was a bit eccentric, at least only in that most devils made great shows of their capabilities or bragged openly on their achievements and status. Zekram had no need. He had no interest in such actions either. It was interesting to see how that could all be expressed by a man simply walking down the halls of his own home in absolute silence. Still, Minato felt he could read the relatively well, at least in that regard. Like with all others who met Zekram Bale, Miento was at a loss as to what was happening in that head behind those cool violet eyes though. You take silence well and know how to be patient and attentive. Zekram suddenly said, nearly causing Minato to trip up after having grown used to the silence. You will need some more work on attention after all it seems. The Bale said simply before opening a final door and leading Minato into a massive grove of trees. I have no doubt you are still confused as to why I would want to purchase you from your family. I have no actual interest in making you the head of my household staff. People who have served me since the start of the Great War, and you would never compare to their loyalty or dedication no matter how strong I make you in the coming why. That leaves us with no reason as to why I would have an interest in you at all though, doesn't it? Yes, Lord Bale. Minato replied quietly following along as the man spoke. From now on you will call me simply sir, or master. Lord Bale gets quite tiresome on the ear after hearing it from everyone all day every day for centuries. Zekram. Before stopping suddenly, Minato, can you guess why it is that I purchased you from your short-sighted parents? Zekram asked. The boy stared up at the man before slowly shaking his head. No, Lord no sir. I wouldn't expect you to. You're a child Minato, but one that is placed in a very unique place. Your clan disowns you, yet you have the potential to grow beyond anything they were capable of to begin with. Do you know why that is? Zekram asked. Because of my reserves of demonic power. Minato asked. No, that will undoubtedly help you, but it has nothing to do with what will make you exactly what I have been looking for. It's something that isn't tangible or measurable. Something an incredibly small amount of our race can even pretend to comprehend. Something you have in spades and share with the handful of devils that I will openly that I admire more than any other. Zekram spoke with a tone that drew Minato in like no other had before. It was impassioned and earnest. Far from the enigmatic and businesslike man that had interacted with his parents. You remind me of them a bit. Not as much as you might hope and not in any way that's initially obvious, but I can see it. You are so much like the first four. Our true Faun. The first Mao. Zekram said with a small wistful smile on his face. What? Minato asked with a gasp. He almost felt as if the wind had been knocked out of him. No one had ever told him he was worth anything more than that of a loyal and tool for his clan after all. You really are. It has nothing to do with power or ability. It's all about intent. An intent that you practically radiate. A desire that is so potent that even your imbecile pair should have felt it. We are devils after all. Desires are our driving force. The thing that breathes energy and life into our souls. Your desires are palpable to me, Minato. You even truly understand them though. Which is fine. You're still very young. You'll come into your own under my tutelage. I promise that much to you at least. Zekram. Before motioning for Minato to stand across from him in a small green clearing. Now, I am not going to bother with a lot of preamble beyond what I've already said. I can sense the amount of work you've already begun putting in. I won't punish you exploring magic like your family might have so. I want to know all of what you can do and what exactly it is you did to make that little hole in the wall back at the Phoenix. No secrets. Zekram commanded. Minato stared up at the man across from him for some time. He felt as though he was in some kind of dream almost. He didn't want to wake up. It might have been childish. Naive to trust the man from a simple speech, but truly what did he have to lose from giving his all to his master? The man was offering him a way to attain his desires and moment he only felt one desire deep inside himself. He wanted power, strength, respect. He wanted the freedom that Zekram Bale flaunted so casually. He craved it with all of his being. So he told the man everything and began his journey as the apprentice to Zekram Bale himself. Minato came to rapidly love his new life serving as an apprentice to Zekram Bale. It was harsh and demanding, physically it was far more brutal than his time as a servant. Phoenix clan had been. It didn't matter to Minato at all though. The training and challenge that Zekram put before him forced him to grow and Minato felt happier than he recalled feeling before. It was challenging though. His muscles screamed as Zekram led him through exercises and martial training that Minato had never imagined existing in the first place. Just the basic training as well. Things to strengthen his body and expand his stamina and natural speed. The Bale Lord seemed to have a bit of a soft spot beneath his hard exterior as well. At least there was one for Minato and devils who were a bit like Zekram himself. He pushed the boy to the brink as he trained him but was always there beside him as he did so. At times Minato even wondered if perhaps this was what a parent was supposed to say. Pushing the child to better themselves but always there when they went too far and needed to recover. He wasn't quite confident enough to express such fondness for the old man. It didn't feel quite right anyway. Zekram didn't look at him with fondness or unconditional love Minato dreamed of. It was a calculated care. Respect for his drive and potential. Nothing more and nothing less. That was of course fine with Minato. It was infinitely better than his parents and clan, so he devoted himself to everything that Zekram placed before him. The results spoke for themselves as well. Today they were practicing magic once again and his master had pushed him to continue with his experiments in how he manipulated his demonic power. There was little support that the man could provide here beyond giving him an idea here and there for trying different ways of manipulation. That was enough though. Today the man had suggested something to Minato that the boy had never thought to try before now. You condense your power down to the tiniest point imaginable. So much so that it causes an implosion when pushed too far. I want you to try and get that condensed for demonic power down to the point just before it implodes, then I want you to tear it apart again. I've never seen someone capable of manipulating their energy quite like why. Minato said this is untested ground. I expect you'll make incredible breakthroughs with it once you learn to master this ability of yours. Zekram told him, which filled the boy confidence and determination to impress him to the best of his ability. Unfortunately that was much easier said than done. Currently he laid on his back covered in painful bruises and scrapes that caused his body to ache and surrounded by sea. Throughout the training ground that his master had given him to work in. The most annoying part was that he could feel how close he was. His master had been right. If he could gain proper control over the restriction and expansion of his such a fine point, he could do something amazing. He knew it. The problem was he was essentially trying to hold an imploding bomb inside his hand and control exactly how energy it expelled and the manner in which it expanded. Not easy, especially for one so young. There was no trick or fast method to accomplish it either. He would just have to keep working until he got the proper feel for how to control it. Then the real work would be. He almost dreaded it, but still the grin wouldn't disappear from his face. As he climbed to his feet to begin again, he turned as he felt the presence of his master enter the clearing. Minato, take a break, here. The man said before summoning a bottle of water with a magic circle. The blonde greedily gulped down the water, much to the amusement of his master. He shook his head as his young apprentice sputtered a bit after drinking a bit too quickly. You are easily the most determined person I've ever met. Perhaps it would help if you slowed down a little and tried to take on the problem a bit slower. Don't force it. It's power, you have control, just guide it how you want it to go. He suggested. Minato released the bottle of water from his mouth before cocking his head to the side in a thoughtful expression. He seemed to be thinking about how to manage that. Unfortunately Zekram couldn't help in that particular instance. This stage of his training was truly untested waters. No one that Zekram had ever heard of could control the power on such a direct and minuscule level. The blonde beside him was truly a genius though. He'd been training him in far more than simply magic and physical aspects. Politics, society, history, mathematics. Everything a gentleman would need in the future once grown up. Minato absorbed it all like a sponge. They'd soon be moving on to tactics, and Zekram had the sinking suspicion that his little protege would continue to prove to be an excellent investment. How do I do that though? Master. Minato asked before nervously adding the respectful term he reserved for Lord Bale. That is something you will have to figure out on your own, Minato. I intend to train you to the best of my ability, but there are some things that only you can do for yours. Zekram admitted. Minato nodded seriously. Most children his age, 8 if Zekram wasn't mistaken, were more concerned with playing and things of that nature. Minato was different. Thankif was reliable and driven. That was all Zekram needed to mold him. His unique skill was a great boon. His reserves were a nice addition. But his mentality was something that couldn't be taught and take him further than any amount of power could. Why don't you try again, but this time take your time. Do as I suggested and guide the reaction rather than forcing it. Zekram said as he held out his hand for the bottle. Water. Minato nodded before handing the bottle over and stepping over to the middle of the training ground. He stared down at his hands for a time. Zekram didn't disturb him and instead watched the process his apprentice had created for himself. The boy stared at his hands and envisioned the action he wanted to create. It was something special too. The gears churning within his mind. Slowly the boy extended his hands. Faint light slipped around his fingers and coalesced into something of a mist of flickering energy. Zekram watched on as the tiniest pin seemed to gather the energy into a spot between Minato's hands. It sparkled and quivered as it built up in power with a faint hum of sound similar to that of a generator kind. For Minato, the energy in his hand constricted and twisted as he compacted it down into the tiniest point that he could manage. It built in strength and he struggled to control as he packed it down tighter and tighter. It felt as though his muscles were being pushed incredibly hard, but in this case it was more his brain or perhaps his spirit. Whatever vessel was used when a devil interacted with their demonic power. Just as he began to feel like he would break and collapse from the strain of it all, he felt it. The final point of no return. It was harder to force himself to stop condensing than he expected, but just narrowly he managed to do it. For a moment the tiny spot of pure demonic energy hovered in place. It practically bubbled with power, but Minato wasn't done with it. And guide the reaction. He whispered out with a breath as the power began to implode. Rather than try and keep it contained, he simply focused his attention on shaping and stabilizing the tear around the edge of the tiny detonation of power. All the while his master watched his progress with widened eyes as the little child accomplished something unprecedented. The detonation of demonic energy stabilized after a moment and Minato stared in shock at his creation. A small field roughly 3 inches across that acted more like a rip space than any kind of explosion as he had created beforehand. What was more was it was stable as long as he kept his focus. He could even alter the shape and size of T with ease. Marvelous, Minato. Zekram praised quietly, bringing a bright smile to the little blonde's face. It's like I was just missing how to do it somehow. Now that I know how to do it, it's like, Minato trailed off as he stared at the field. Like it is easy. Zekram chuckled softly. Yes. Minato replied, though he was clearly distracted by something. Zekram waited patiently for the boy's mind to wrap around whatever it was trying to process. He'd learned by now that his apprentice was more than capable of incredibly complex ideas, as well as simplifying those ideas into terms that he could express to others. Master, could you show me your power of destruction? Minato asked, catching even Zekram a bit off guard. Certainly, though I am curious what you are thinking in that head of yours, boy. The man said before turning to a withered old tree and releasing a splash of his power. As all things were when impacted by the power of destruction of the Bale clan, the dried bark of the tree was consumed rapidly in the red and black energy of its power. Broken down in miniaturized explosions all across its form until nothing was left. He turned his eyes back to Minato, whose own blue orbs flickered back and forth between now destroyed tree and his own shimmering field of energy. I don't understand. Master, how did you do that? How does your power of destruction really work? Minato asked, causing Zekram to tense up. Normally, even being asked such a question about his power would have him on edge and wary of the intentions of the one asking him. Minato wasn't trying to work out weaknesses to his ability, though. He was about as far from an opponent as Zekram could get. Barring perhaps his own family. How does this apply to your ability there, Minato? He asked. Because I think I am misunderstanding something about how our powers work objectively. I don't really need to know how your power works, Master. Only what does it do to its target? Does it really completely destroy it? With nothing left at all? Minato asked as he turned his attention back to his own magic and began to alter the shape. Size of the tiny field. Zekram hummed in thought at that. The reasoning clicked into place in his own mind. I see. No. It doesn't completely destroy the target. At least not without leaving something behind. Even with magic, some laws of nature are absolute. Even the power of destruction leaves behind ash and energy from the consumption and destruction of matter. Matter can't truly be eliminated, only changed in form. So the power of destruct does that to such an efficient extent it leaves only the tiniest traces of its target behind in the finest ash. Zekram explained. Oh, then this won't destroy things truly. I don't really get it, but I notice the air caught in the field is gone somewhere, if it's not destroyed really. Minato said, causing to step closer to his power and examine it. You can't reduce air to ashes and dust. You can't really see what's going on with it using air as the target either. Use it on this stone here, Minato. The man said as he out a target. Yes, master. The boy dutifully answered before stepping forward and channeling his new creation into a position and shape so it consumed the tiny pebble that his master pointed out. Almost the rock was devoured by the field before suddenly rocketing out the other side at a much faster pace than it had been placed inside the field of energy. It cracked boy in the forehead and sent him tumbling across the ground as his field of demonic energy fizzled and dispersed. I see. Now that is an interesting development. Zekram said, ignoring the boy sulking on the ground and rubbing the sore spot where the rock had smacked into his skull. You displaced the object from its place and the sudden change in position accelerated it. I think in time you'll be able to control not only where objects exit your energy be. They do and at what speed they do it at. The Baal postulated. That would be preferable to getting hit in the head like that every time. Minato bemoaned. Zekram chuckled before reaching down and picking the boy up onto his feet. Come along, this is an incredible breakthrough, but you're exhausted and in pain right now. We need to focus on some book work anyway. I want you to go get cleaned up. Meet me in the dining hall. We'll be going over the connections between various noble families while we take our evening meal. Zekram informed, getting only a nod from boy. The older man nearly laughed at the sullen look in the child's eyes. He wanted to keep working on his new creation. Not that Zekram blamed him, but the practice and explosions he had tried to control had exhausted him more than he realized. He would need to rest his body for a while. Thankfully they had plenty of material to go over. Didn't require Minato to do anything more than think and speak. His apprentice would be well-rounded thanks to it, even if Zekram himself was also excited by the prospect of what they had discovered this afternoon. The following years went by quickly for both Minato and Zekram. As was expected of him, Minato worked hard to continue his studies and progress as the apprentice of lore. He grew tall and strong just as his mind grew sharper and his abilities expanded to things few devils would even imagine. Of course few knew anything about Lord Baal's very private apprentice. The enigmatic blonde was practically always hard at work, either studying or training in some way. Was what Lord Baal had desired for him from the start. Such peaceful time spent expanding his skills would one day come to an end after all, and neither Minato or Zekram wanted to waste the opportunity that had at the moment to push Minato's capabilities to new heights. Today, however, Zekram had called him in from his training ground a bit early. He'd had him clean up and meet him in his study for a discussion. Usually when these things happened it was because Zekram wanted to talk about his future or the many plans that Zekram had for their people. Those plans were extensive. Course. Anything else would have been unacceptable for the living legend that was Zekram Baal. As one of the few remaining founders of a noble clan, he had seen their from the very beginning and dreamed of the heights they could go. He'd made it clear to Minato that was part of why he had selected him as his apprentice. It was also why he had done such things as hold the party that they had first met. After all, Zekram had little to no interest in interacting with the current generation of nobles of the underworld. In his own words, they were nearly all worthless souls destined fall to the wayside as their successors replaced them. He'd even quietly spoken of his contempt for the current Mao as well. His disgust for them was worse than held for the many weak and overly proud clan heads. He had personally known and looked up to the four original Mao after all. The way he spoke to Minato about the true Lucifer and his compatriots and the dreams that the held for all of their people so long ago simply made Minato wish that he too had known them. The passion that they had passed on to Zekram was intoxicating, and he only imagine what they had been like in person. The ability to forge an entire domain for their people from nothing, and the ambition to make war against the Creator himself as well as his legions of angels to bring about greater existence for all of them. It made him feel like a historical footnote in comparison. Tonight it looked as though a similar discussion would be occurring. Minato, I trust that practice is going along well. Zekrom asked. It is. I've begun displacing myself consistently now and altering the path of projectiles easily now. Minato reported. Excellent. You are 15 now, it's about time I start introducing you to the more strategic side of being a truly conscientious gentleman of hell. Zekrom said as he motioned the boy to take a seat. I look forward to your tutelage, master. Minato responded. Hey, your etiquette is always refreshing, my precious student. Zekrom said warmly. Minato had not been the only one to change over the last few years. Lord Bale had also developed a warmer personality when in private with his student. They both brug best out of one another and could share a game of chess with the same cheerful demeanor as when they sparred together. As you know, I have made it my personal mission to guide our people and society toward a point where they are truly at their greatest height. In doing so, I monitor the Fu generations rising up in the ranks of our people as well as try to offer guidance to those already in positions of power. This is of course how I came to possess you as a stew. My greatest success thus far, I imagine. Zekrom explained as he poured both himself and Minato a drink. You always flatter me, master. I simply wish to make you proud. Minato replied. Such a good student I have. Nevertheless, tonight I have a much more grim matter to discuss with you. The inevitable fact that is the oncoming civil war here in the underworld. The day draws nearer and nearer no matter what I might do to prevent it. Zekrom said, causing Minato to blink in surprise before he schooled his features and focused his attention on past events that had occurred recently. I don't understand, master. I thought you said things were advancing spectacularly for our people. Why would we be moving toward war? He asked. Perhaps I misled you unintentionally, Minato. As unfortunate as the coming war is, it truly is a necessity. In fact, I am doing everything in my power to ensure that I happens. The Bale clan had said, causing Minato to freeze up in shock. You are encouraging it, he muttered. I'm planning it. Our current system is corrupt and wasteful. It also goes against the core value of our people. We desire and respect ambition and power. How then can we follow those willing to share power with one another? More than that, as much as we devils respect and laud power, we do not inherently approve of the abuse of it. RCU leaders are lazy, often sadistic, and in my own opinion more idiotic than the lowliest of our peasantry among the lower class devils. I refuse to let such things continue. The society our great founders gave their lives for, be ruined by their pathetic grandchildren. Zekrom explained, causing Minato to lean back into his seat as he processed master's words. The Paris asked in silence as Zekrom gave him time to mull over his words. He smiled when the boy finally responded. A new system with a single king. That's what you've been hinting at in all the sessions when you taught me politics and social studies. You intend to reorganize our entire society with a singular individual as ruler. It is the system our two rivals among the angels and fallen angels use, is it not? If it works for them, why then would it not work even better for us? You would crown yourself the king of hell then. The amount of work you would need to do to begin the process would take years. Decades at least, centuries would be. Minato pointed out. Then it is in our benefit that I started my planning some time ago. 2 centuries before you yourself were even born. I am no bold fool, Minato. Rather, I am a bold old Ma. Knows his fellow devils and their desires better than any other being in existence. Zekrom said as he sipped at his drink. Minato nodded slowly before a small grin spread on his lips. He'd heard of the abuses that the current Mao and the elite clans subjected others to. He didn't share his disdain for the lowest among their society's people. The lower class to Minato were just as good as the high class, even if they lacked the power of their supposed betters. Was a position he kept securely confined within his own mind though. He had grown close to Lord Bale, but the older man was a conservative individual in many matters including class position and responsibility. What is it you require of me, master? Minato asked the man, getting a chuckle from the Bale. Nothing more than the same you have always provided, Minato. Your very best. Tomorrow 4 young devils of influential clans among the pillar families will be coming to stay the summer with us. They, like yourself, are unique in their births. They possess characteristics that make them ideal for my planned future for our people and their are all close allies of mine that I have worked hard to cultivate for the last 200 years. You'll train together, but you will show them all that your place is my own. Apprentice has set you apart from them. You will show them just what it is that makes you so special. We'll move on from there. Zekram explained. I see. You want me to beat up your guests in a spar then? Minato coolly replied. Don't humiliate them but remind them that there is more to strength and power than simple use of devastating bloodlines. After all, it isn't their bloodlines that I desire, it's everything else that they are. As you wish. I'll give them something to remember me. Minato stood as he spoke and Zekram nodded. Good. I'll be watching, so no holding back. I wouldn't dream of it. He laughed as he left. Sirzex was glad that his mother was hardly anything like Lord Bale was. She was loving and kind to him while the old man was critical and hard to read. He supposed were attributes that most devil nobles were supposed to embody, but being a Grimoire, Sirzex was very happy that his mother seemed to have adopted the traits of his rather than kept those of her original family. You really think the old man's apprentice is going to be that interesting? Serafal asked from beside him. He's a strict man and didn't seem like one to boast. Plus you've all heard the stories about him fighting in the Great War. If his apprentice is anything like him, then I'm be interesting. Ajuka replied. Why not introduce us himself though? Why send us out here to track the guy down? Isn't that a bit annoying? Falbium suggested. It's because my master believes that the best introductions are done by yourself. It's kind of silly, but he says that being introduced by another person interrupts the first impression someone has of another. A new voice that the four devils didn't immediately recognize said as a blonde boy around their age seemed to simply appear from tree. I didn't even sense your demonic power. Ajuka said, a bit distraught. Well, I was taught by my master how to suppress it. It's a good habit to do so. Whether so not to distract others or not to give away your capabilities. Ah, forgive me. I actually introduce myself rather than chatting about, master this, master that. The boy said as he approached them. Sirzex felt a bit on guard, but the boy also seemed like the genial sort. So as he extended his hand, the Grimoire heir returned the gesture and shook. I'm Minato, formerly of the Phoenix clan. Apprentice to Lord Bale. It's nice to meet you all. He said warmly. I'm Sirzex Grimoire, this is Ajuka Astaroth, Serafal Citri, and Falbium Glacia Labelas. I suppose we're all staying with you at the Bale estate for the summer. Some agreement between our parents and Lord Bale. Sirzex replied. You know how it is. Politics. Minato replied with an odd glimmer in his eyes. So, Minato, what was the point of us meeting you out here? Falbium asked. He was clearly unhappy with having to trek out into the woods on the Bale family grounds. Oh, master didn't tell you. Odd. Well, maybe he meant for me to ambush you or something. A bit late for that though. Either way, we are supposed to spar. An introduction to our abilities and personalities or something. He chirped. Just like that. Serafal asked. Yeah, just go with it. You will all get used to how things work around here in no time, and master will make sure you all end up stronger for it too. For now though, let's get started. Minato grinned viciously before dropping through the ground itself and disappearing. The four clan heirs blinked in shock at the sudden disappearance of the other boy. He was there and then he wasn't. Ajuka, Sirzex muttered. No magic circle, but he definitely transported himself. The question is where? Ajuka replied as the four of them began to shift into a guarded position and slowly summon their demonic power. The answer is up here. Minato called out directly above them before waving his hand in front of himself and causing all four of his opponents to fall into the ground just a did before them. He scattered the four of them to different points all around the forest before selecting one to focus on. No offense to the gray-haired boy, but Falbium did seem like the willing to give up after a brief skirmish. His thoughts were proven true the exact moment he landed before the other boy and opened a pair of displacement fields on either of himself that showered Falbium with stones as if blasting him with shotgun shells. I didn't sign up for this crap. The boy cried as he tried in vain to shield himself from the onslaught. Tap out then. We'll have plenty of time to work out together later. Master just wants me to make an impression on you all today. Minato shrugged as the stone being who The other boy began to grow in size. Impression made. Go beat on someone else already. The other one cried out. Huh, I expected, doesn't matter I guess. Minato shrugged before stepping backward into another displacement field and walking out of a tree right next to Serafal Kazi. To scream in surprise and try to slap him. Try being the key word as her hand entered a displacement field beside his head before ever reaching his target. What is this? She asked, cringing at the feeling her hand had. Ah, I figured out how to displace things into other things. Your hand is currently inside a fish in the pound over there. Those are its guts I think you are feeling. He said. Grin that became a full-blown laugh as she screamed again and yanked her hand out before shaking it from side to side. Sorry about this by the way. He said before opening another field behind her and shoving her through it into the gut of a massive fish. She'd be fine. Though he wonder. This was really the first impression that his master was hoping he would make on his peers. 2 down I guess. He said before making another displacement portal and stepping through. This time he was on the defensive though as a pair of balls of ice and fire crashed into the spot just as he appeared there. Narrowly moving out of the way, only thanks to intense physical training that Zekrom had pushed onto him, Minato rolled out of the way of another blast, this time of lightning. You are athletic too. I wondered if you would just be a powerful caster type when I saw you create those spells without generating a magic circle first. Ajuka called out. Another circle spun to life beside him, this time looking to be creating a mixture of earth and water for some kind of muddy trap spell. You won't catch me with that. Also it wasn't so much a spell I used as direct manipulation of my demonic energy. Minato called out. You know what spell I'm preparing by just glancing at the circle? Ajuka asked in shock. Oh yeah, though that is not near as impressive as this, watch. Minato said, creating the exact same magic circle that Ajuka had, before applying his technique to it cause color of the circle to shift and the light it produced to flicker a bright gold before the spell activated and a torrent of thick muddy projectiles fired out of it like a cannon. Ajuka released his own spell and tried to flee from the glue-like mud, but the shock from such a technique existing had slowed him down just enough for his foot to be cow. The attack. He was locked into place and Minato finished him off with a tap to the back of the head. Tap of course being a bit of an understatement as the boy collapsed int. Heap on the ground. That left only one more. Searzex had been the one his master had warned him the most about. The Grimoire heir possessed the abilities of the Bale clan after all and there was a reason they were feared and respected. What was more, Searzex himself was far from the average devil in mentality. Zekrom didn't approve of much of the redhead's mindset. His love and care for lesser devils was something Zekrom considered wasteful, but Minato could respect that. However, he also was an out-of-the-box thinker and more than willing to try something new if he thought it would pay off. So as Minato appeared before him, the fight was on from the jump. Saved me for last? Searzex asked. The others seemed interesting but you are something a bit more intriguing to me. Minato answered simply. Let me guess, because I have the Bale clan's power of destruction. Not even remotely. After all, I see that ability almost daily. No, you interest me because when I brought up being formerly of the Phoenix clan you looked at me not with just a little sadness. Your friends all considered it a tragedy to be removed from my clan. You however just looked sad that such a thing ever occurred. It's a minor difference. A difference all the same. Minato explained. That is ridiculous. You're telling me you got all of that from what looking in my eyes for a split second? Searzex asked as he launched a blast of power of destruction at M. A displacement field opened up and the attack terminated a nearby boulder with ease. I like to think I have very good attention to detail and a skill at reading others. I am noticing you aren't denying that I was right though. Minato pointed out. And if you are, so what? Searzex asked. It means you think like I do. I think you and I will be great friends. At least after you wake up. Minato said from behind the other boy as a fist-sized rock smacked him in back of the head and put him to sleep. Hey, master, I may have cheated a bit and jumped them when they weren't ready. Minato said to a tiny magical circle beside his head. That's fine. They will need to be used to such things for what is to come. I'll send some staff to collect them and bring them back to the estate. Get yourself cleaned up. On having a more civil introduction at supper. Zekrom's voice returned to him over the magical circle. Understood. Oh, The sea tree girl might need a while to get cleaned up. I sort of put her inside a giant fish in your lake. Minato chuckled. Zekrom only sighed before ending the communication.